Now, as the subject is memory, we don't want to forget what the subject is. The man who suffered from amnesia went to his doctor and said, "I have an amnesia, doctor." The doctor said, "How long have you had it?" The man said, "Has what?" So anyway, this morning we're going to deal with the problem of memory. It is one of the most important and wonderful faculties that we possess, and like most of our assets, can become one of our worst liabilities. Most people are trying to forget something, and today memory is a nagging conscience. Memory is something that reminds us of our own mistakes. Memory helps us to remember times that were better than now. All kinds of tricks are played by memory, but I think the Pythagoreans had the real answer to the problem. They call this answer retrospection. And retrospection is thinking backwards. It is the process of thinking of what has happened rather than worrying about what will happen. The Pythagoreans took it for granted that if the things that have happened are right, the things that will happen will be right also. On the other hand, we have to grow, and Lord Bacon pointed out that growth has historical outline. We know the memory of the rocks, where by stratification we are able to estimate the age of continents and the great volcanic cataclysms that have occurred. We know the record that is kept of the rings of trees, some of which are nearly 5,000 years old. We know the memory that is found in all the different climates and countries of the world, histories that are recorded in ruins today, histories that are remembered through the pyramids, the sphinxes, and the great temples that have gradually crumbled away. All of these have to do with memory. We can remember, and we also know that from the beginning human beings have wanted to be remembered. They wish to leave some monument of themselves. We have this today. People of today are building things they hope will bear witness to them after they are gone. Everywhere memory becomes an invitation to enrich the future by the wisdom of the past. Lord Bacon points out that it is a mistake to assume that memory is a disaster. Memory is part of an equipment we have been given to use. Most persons have a tendency to abuse memory. They have a tendency to remember the worst that ever happened to them. They remember the mistakes of their friends and the injustices that they have suffered. Very few people very carefully remember the mistakes that they have made. They are victims of something else. There was some other reason why they made a wrong move at a certain time. Actually, memory is a key to all that has happened to us in the embodiment which we now occupy. And whether we realize it or not, previous embodiments are etched into the very substance of our present consciousness. We are what we are today because of what we have been. We will be tomorrow what we are today, plus the experiences that we accept. The worrier misuses memory. The individual who continually meditates upon the miseries of the past, that individual also abuses memory. We abuse memory when we keep up feuds, when we are unable to mingle with people on a friendly basis. We remember grievances, dishonesties, mistakes, and always try to blame them on someone else. Actually, as Pythagoras pointed out, memory should be a careful rehearsal in reverse of our own daily thinking. The day flows from dawn to dark. Retrospection goes from dark back to dawn. It gives us a different perspective on the various problems that have come to us through the day. In other words, retrospection is a kind of digestion and assimilation of a day's work. It is something that we use each day to bring into order of consciousness and of understanding the various large and small situations that have arisen in the previous 12 hours. We can remember the phone call and the interruption. We can remember when the phone call was a wrong number and we were irritated. We can remember when the wrong person comes to see us. We can remember also all the gossip about neighbors, friends, associates. We can also meditate upon the fallacies of policy and also upon the dishonesty of everything and everyone. And we can build for ourselves a nice negative day. Now, when we have this all accumulated in one place, we will gradually discover that it is chronic. To start this type of attitude is to become a victim of it before it's all over. Once we can make a complete pattern of negation, we have to live with it. And Pythagoras pointed out that the answer was to solve the problem within the day in which it occurs. So we said a crossword. We were unpleasant to a child. We had a bit of gossip with a neighbor. We shared some choice beliefs of our own where they were not specially welcome. All these things made up the day. So we have to settle back now and see what we did wrong, why we were wrong, and why we should have acted differently, and if there's any possibility of redress, why we should make it as quickly as we can. So we will learn gradually to realize that most of our troubles originate in ourselves. We are either the cause of a difficulty or we accept one without due consideration for values. One of the most common memories today is gossip. And gossip is a very cruel thing because it usually gradually increases by repetition and by distribution until some small factor or circumstance becomes hopelessly overburdened with meanings. We therefore try to avoid that. If by any chance we have said something unkind, we have done something at least minutely dishonest, these things should be corrected. And we should gradually realize through each day the workings of universal law. We should know each day that the laws of life are operating. And our problem is to reconcile our own mistakes with the universal processes which make up life. If we can succeed in doing this, we will find each day we grow. Each day we come a little nearer to the fulfillment of our own integrities. Pythagoras also pointed out in his thinking that where we had a mistake, maybe it is impossible to correct that mistake. Words spoken cannot be taken back. Actions that are destructive may not be saved or amended. So we have to take another attitude. We have to say, if I cannot compensate the person or situation, then I must make a new, better situation as a compensation. If we have had trouble with someone and that person has passed on 20 years ago and the grievance is still kept up, then it is our problem to make a new friendship in the name of that person, to have a better relationship with someone now to pay for the poor relationship we had in the past. In all various situations where we are wrong, if we cannot right them with the person involved, we must right them in principle the next time a situation arises in which they can be used. Every apology may be an opportunity to pay tribute to a mistake we made in the past. We may not be able to correct that mistake, but we can do something right in the name of it. So wherever we go along through life, we have a memory that has to be trained. Today our most common remark is, forget it. And probably people mean that. But in fact, substance, in essence, we don't forget it. Anything that should be forgotten is etched in the memory with great depth. We really don't want to forget it. We want to nurse the grievance. We want to be abused. We want to blame someone for something. So the saying, forget it, simply means that we want someone to forget our mistake, but not to correct it in ourselves. To forget even something that happens to us is a waste, because things have meaning. What happens to us is important. And if we try to forget everything that is unpleasant, the main purpose of life is destroyed. Actually, we are not here necessarily just to have fun. The fun generation is gradually wearing out. It didn't last very long because it had no real legitimate existence. We are not here merely to enjoy the privileges of life. We are here to share in both the privileges and the responsibilities. It is our moral duty to accept the fact that we have duties to perform, that we have a role to play, that we have a life to live, and that this life can be important. And the more important we make it to others, the more important it becomes to ourselves. I know a lot of people who think that the end of life is to escape responsibility, to do as they please, to have fun, and to ignore the world to which they belong and which they attempt to escape from. Now, several types of people attempt this. Some honestly and sincerely believe that they do not need to partake of anything that they don't agree with. Well, if you do not agree with something, just to ignore it is not the answer either. If there is something you can do to improve that something that worries you, then it is your duty also to accept it. It is the duty of every person to be busy, to be doing things that within their own capacities are important. And mostly the things that are important to others should take preference. The idea that we are therefore intended simply to live on the surface of existence is not true. And the consequences of this type of life are at least boredom and gradually a sense of surfeit. The life is no longer valuable, important, or meaningful. It is like a vacation. A vacation every year is a blessing. A perpetual vacation is a curse. The individual loses values. We have to be busy growing. And the most important thing in this world is to grow. It is to correct the mistakes of the past and not repeat them. It is to overcome the prejudices which have influenced our thinking. It is to free ourselves of the small things that do not count and make arrangements in our time patterns for the big things that do count. So we are here always, as the Greeks believed, because of necessity. And one of the early Greek philosophers said that the world turns on the spindle of necessity. Everything is moved by a need. There is something important waiting for every person. They must even sometimes draw back a little because it comes too fast. But certainly there is something that is needed to each life. Whatever we are at the moment is less than we can be in the next moment. We are here definitely to do things that improve ourselves and protect our way of life. If we leave any of this to others, we will be in the same fix that we are now in politically. When we hire people and pay them exorbitant prices to do our thinking for us, all they will do is think us out of everything we have. We know this. Also, we know that we cannot depend upon others who are untested to prove valuable to us in a moment of necessity. Each individual must share to the best of his ability in making things better for himself and his world. he must also use memory, because memory is a record of things as they have been and as they are. Memory is an unwritten descent of facts. Memories bring us to understand the laws of cause and effect. They help us to see the mistakes of the past. If we try to blot these out, forget it idea, we keep on making the same mistakes. The same laws operate, and the same tragedies are repeated. It is necessary for the person who comes into this world to leave it better than he found it. And this is true not only of civilization, but of himself. He must pass out of this life a better person than he was when he came in. If there is nothing between the cradle and the grave except the effort to enjoy oneself, there is not much progress. And in the large pattern of things, we are here for progress, not merely for enjoyment. There is, of course, a philosophical explanation for this, namely that doing what is right should be the source of the greatest joy. It would be if we really understood the laws of nature, if we realized that the fulfillment of truth gives us the greatest possible sense of achievement. If we can realize that, we can gradually get our pleasures and our joys out of growing rather than out of indolence. We have long considered the individual to be most fortunate who does the least. He has servants, secretaries, he has all kinds of help. He doesn't raise his hand to anything much except maybe a game of golf occasionally. The fact that he does nothing is a symbol of his success. This is just not true. The individual who does nothing remains inferior to the person who does something. And the idea that we are here to create so many body comforts, and so many luxuries, that we are completely free from work, have no sense of duty, and have no part in the restoration of society. This type of success is a fallacy, and we know it, we see it. Memory tells us it is. Our own memory tells us of the small examples in our own living, and through the longer memory of history, we see how nations have risen and fallen. Today, history is more or less complete. We know pretty much the history of the last 10,000 years. We know its problems, and we're rather amazed when we sit down and realize that the mistakes that were made by the Phoenicians, Babylonians, and Chaldeans are being repeated today with great emphasis and on a much larger scale. The very mistakes that buried the past and of which we have proper record are being repeated, and repeated on a larger and more elaborate scale because of the fact that we have more privileges and opportunities. Therefore, unless we use memory, we have no valid check. We have no way of knowing just what luxury does unless we have memory and its larger equivalent in history. Our history in the world today is very largely a history of mistakes. And this history of mistakes is repeated in the personal life of the individual of today. His life is very largely a problem in failure to accept or anticipate the natural processes of universal law. We create human laws, which we try to keep, but it doesn't make much difference because most of these laws are not very good anyway. But we do not follow the original laws. The Code of Hammurabi, which is one of the oldest of all human codes, was accredited to the god Nebo. The Pentateuch tells us that the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, is credited to Moses as writing out from the hand of God. All these codes were originally conceived as divinely inspired. But I think we can say with safety that most of our modern legislations are not divinely inspired. They are much more the effort, again, of the individual to evade and avoid. He is determined not to do those things which inconvenience him. He does not support the things he believes. He does not detract his attention from the things he does not believe. He just goes along trying to have fun. And as a matter of fact, in our 20th century, in the year 80s of that century, we are having the fun of about 10 or 12 wars at the same time. We are in trouble everywhere, and everyone is trying to pass a legislation. You cannot legislate human selfishness. The only thing you can do is to outgrow it. And the only way to outgrow it is to recognize it and change it. There is no possibility of fighting our way to peace. There is no way in any way of accumulating our way to correct poverty. These things are in the mind of nature. They are in the papers and records that have been written to tell the story of nations, of peoples, of races. In every case, we find the same cause bringing the same result. And the temporal forms of education, the ordinary secular and religious doctrines of the people, do not change the facts because these peoples have not changed themselves. So it becomes very necessary to have memory, because memory is the one thing that, if it's used properly, can go a long way to correct the mistakes of the past. When you suggest something now that you think might help people, the first question probably will arise is, how do you know? What makes you think that would work? Why don't you try something else? The answer again is memory. If you make a suggestion that has worked for 10,000 years successfully, you have a fact as far as man can have a fact. But if you ignore all that has gone before and say, yes, the ancients made all these mistakes, but we have outgrown them, then we must have a hard look at ourselves and see if we have outgrown them. In most cases, we'll find we haven't. We have not any better character than the ancients, except we have more luxury and more inventions to back up our mistakes. We are still in great need of memory. We are in great need of memory if we hope for world peace, if we hope for the union of religions, if we hope for proper domestic life, if we desired our children to grow up as worthy citizens. We've got to go to memory to find out how this can be done and why we haven't done it now. It's a case of using memory, therefore, as an instrument, not merely a recording. It has to be used to demonstrate and show the way in which solutions come. We are beginning to see it in small things. We have a number of groups floating around that are trying desperately to bring home the proof of the past, that they have found how these things operated. But when you bring this to the scoffer, his answer is again, oh, forget it. Forget anything that is disagreeable, even though it's justly and well deserved. Forget anything that interferes with fun, because fun is a very important thing. If you can have fun from the cradle to the grave, why do anything else? But if that is true, why come here at all? Why are we born into a world imperfect simply to enjoy our imperfections? Why are we here in a world full of war, having fun, but making no effort to increase in a practical way the probabilities of peace? This brings home to each person the fact that ignorance has to be considered important. Now, in colleges and universities, history is not a favorite subject. History is simply the memory of nations. History began with cuneiform tablets. History goes back to oral tradition. It goes back to the runes and the sagas. History is the story of man's growth, his coming forward out of the past into the present and drifting toward the future. In history we find all the mistakes that have been made to date, and they are numerous. And in history we find out how people tried to work with these mistakes. And we realize that for the most part, the mistakes triumphed, because the individual, in order to correct the mistakes, had to give up some of the fun that to him was the most important thing in the world. Instead of having a better and deeper understanding and insight, he had to simply continue having fun. Well, the Romans had fun until they couldn't do it any longer. Then along came the Goths and the Visigoths and destroyed them. Each civilization died of its own weaknesses, and it continues to suffer and struggle because of the fact these weaknesses are not corrected. Today there is a great deal of excitement over the problems of correcting the mistakes of education. There are at least 50 different records of the past of how experiments were made in education. We know how some failed and some succeeded, and we realize that in most cases the doing of the right thing was just too much of a responsibility and too much trouble to continue with. It interfered with the individual having fun. It interfered with him doing exactly as he pleased in a world where he could only do what was right and survive. All these things are in the memory of life. They're there. We can read them. They can be taught in history. There is no reason why the average school child should not be able to estimate values before he graduates from high school. He should know that the so-called virtues that we talk about are not platitudes of narrow-minded ancestors. They are the certain records of thousands of years of human effort to live and survive. And the moment these laws are ignored, the moment we no longer practice the integrities, our survival is sacrificed. So we have history as a wonderful form of written memory. We have it not only in the past, but we see the roots of tomorrow in the development of historical context. We realize that we are moving now in a historical environment, and that we are following very closely a dozen systems that have perished in the past. Unless we make some corrections in what we are doing, we will also become part of history and hope that something will come along after us that will remind people of the lessons that we learned the hard way. So we know that memory is therefore very, very important. But then there's a great difference as to what we memorize. What most people today are memorizing only on one level of interest, economic. The individual wishes to graduate a potential lawyer, a potential doctor, or a potential technician, scientist, or a high financier of some kind. We all are studying for one purpose, and that purpose is to succeed. Now, memory tells us how that was done in the past. We know how it was accomplished. We know what happened to those who did it. We realize, if we look back into history, that the things that are important, the things that have survived, are not on those levels. The things that help people to survive were dreams, ideals, hopes, and the martyrdom of saints. They were definitely a dream of something better than material success. That material success cannot go further than the grave, that everything we have has to be left behind, and all through the histories we find this is true. Therefore, why are we so completely satisfied to teach to our children as higher education ideas, concepts, and policies which have always failed and have brought down every civilization that accepted them? Memory is not working. Memory is not working in the public school system. It is not working in the local government system. And it is not working in the average private family. These factors are probably partly due to the fact that families, for the most part, and civilization in general, has never read a book on history. History was something that to most people was a dead subject. It's nothing but the past. It's all over. It's all gone. But we don't realize that history can reincarnate, so to say, and come down to us as a problem today. The history we have created by our mistakes is still with us and will remain with us until we change the course of action. Now, we also in history have records of some very notable and very wonderful people. We have the great leaders who have sought to bring to mankind a higher level of life. We know the great world teachers. We know Buddha and Moses and Confucius and Lao Tzu and Jesus, Muhammad, all the great teachers that have come to serve us. We know that almost all of them have either died martyrs or of a broken heart. They have died and left with us something that has lived, but lived a precarious existence. Most people will admit that Confucius was a wise man, but so that was China 2,600 years ago. So what? They are not prepared to face the simple fact that Confucius made as one of his closing statements in life. He says, "I can find no master, no leader, no prince, no scholar who will help to make a better world." He finally decided that he had failed. Later, a beautiful temple was built to him, and his name in great golden letters was on a plaque in the wall. But no one did the things that he suggested. He suggested that the foundation of a civilization is the family. That on all levels, political, social, economic, and spiritual, the term family is the thing we have to think about. Humanity is a family. Races are families within that larger family. Personal homes are families. And as goes the home, so goes the world. Confucius pointed out very clearly that if the home fails, if family honors are not maintained, if the integrities of parents and children are not preserved, that nation will fall. Many have fallen from this ailment. We think Confucius is a pretty wise man, so we keep on breaking all the rules of family. We are no longer able to even conceive of humanity as one family. It is a mass of fractions breaking each other, destroying each other. Yet Confucius was right. And Confucius can prove very definitely where even a little experiment in the right direction lived, and the great mass of mistakes perished together. Yet we have not learned, and we do not think of these things. Now we can say the same thing, for instance, of Muhammad. Today, the problem of Muhammad is a rather ticklish one. But if we read in the Quran, we say, in the words of the Prophet himself, "Who does not believe that Jesus of Nazareth was a prophet sent by the Lord, such a one will not enter heaven." That isn't quoted, however, in Persia and many of these countries. And incidentally, when Muhammad's little son, Ibrahim, was a child, he had a Christian nurse that was given to him by Muhammad. The boy did not live to maturity, but all this intolerance was not part of him, part of the victorious caliphate that followed him. We look in other directions for the themes, for the various problems. We find in Buddhism a very simple answer to the whole thing. There are two quests: the quest for physical power and the quest for inner light. From inner light comes peace. From peace comes the salvation of nations. From peace comes the creation of true progress. On the other side is the life of profit, each individual trying to gain from the others, each putting his own success above the common good, and ending, as Buddha pointed out, with chaos. All these things we do know, and memory can refresh them for us. And we are in a much better position than we would be if we had to say these things only on our own. If we had to say, this I believe, and someone else will say, well, this that you believe, I do not believe. But when you are able to point out a principle that is true, and point out that the ages have sustained it, that it has been proven many, many times and never disproven, then perhaps you have a strong argument to present your point. In any event, memory does all these things for us. Memory is also a way of training. Memory is the way by which we can gain control of ourselves. Memory is to stay with patterns of purpose. Memory is the individual who is not changed from his principles by some passing flurry of success. Memory is also the ability to pass judgment upon past circumstances. Memory gives us an understanding of why we may be neurotic, because we came from a poorly established family. Memory may teach us why we are what we are, but at the same time it teaches us how to get over it. It teaches us to explain our mistakes, but at the same time realize that they are mistakes and correct them. Memory also has many interesting contributions to make to art, to music, and to all of the finer things of life. Great art is always an expression of memory. We remember something that is true, something that is real, something that is beautiful, and we try to perpetuate it through the skills of our own natures. For some, skill is music, for others, skill is painting, some is for its sculpturing, others for architecture. But skill is always a mysterious wisdom, a wisdom based upon law. All great art is lawful. All great art is purposed. All great art is a fulfillment of the inner memories of consciousness. It is something that brings forth out of ourselves, as out of a mental or intellectual womb, beauty and truth and fineness. So we see why, in spite of all the changing tides of life, that the great architecture remains. The magnificent cathedrals still stand. The great temples, mosques, and images are still here. And even more practically and closer to us are the works of the painters and the sculptors. We still recognize the divine gift of beauty. We perpetuate it through the development of skills. But as time goes on, we have failed to understand and protect beauty. Beauty is something that can be found in memory, can be traced back as far as we want to go, and has always been what it will have to be again, an expression of the sublimity within ourselves. Beauty is the revelation of a divine truth brought into physical expression and manifestation through the skill of the mind and the memories of the soul. These things we have to memorize. Then we see something come along that is an atrocious thing, without beauty, without form, without any existence that is meaningful, without any purpose, with nothing but a mass of deformity, and we pay a fortune for it. Why? Because it is by a name artist, whose name has been built up by a broker and a good manager. It has nothing to do with value. And it is the same in all of our arts. Gradually, the loss of the soul vision within ourselves has resulted in a degeneration of the arts. When we look inside of ourselves, we remember the wrong things. We do not remember the beauty of the sunset. We remember the indignities of mankind. We do not go back again to the great causes and purposes of existence. We are satisfied to mumble around in the mistakes of our own minds. So, we see how memory gave us, in the first place, Leonardo da Vinci, and also the great painters of the Renaissance. We know how the great music came to be. The great statues were carved. Actually, one of the greatest of all sculptors was Socrates. Socrates made the statue of the three Graces that stood in the Acropolis in Athens. And someone said to him, "How did you do it?" Oh, he said, "It was very simple. The Graces were always in the block of marble. I only cut away the part that was not necessary." In other words, when you come into life, the dignity and greatness of life is always there. It is always hidden in the crudest forms. All we have to do is very carefully remove the part that is not necessary. And in memory we have to do the same. We have to forget that which is meaningless. And one of course, the most prominent of all meaningless factors is excuses, justifications. The individual trying to prove to himself that he had the right to be wrong. This is a mistake in itself. No one has the right to be wrong. We are in a world that condones it in some cases. But no matter how our environment accepts our mistakes, we have to pay for them ultimately. We pay for them here or hereafter. In the old days, the ancients had a very different look upon them as to the life of a man after death. They didn't have the idea that the individual was going to go to heaven or immediately dip down into some infernal region. The Greeks were of the opinion that this wasn't reasonable because there was really no one that was good enough for heaven, and actually no one that was bad enough for hell. Therefore, in order to balance it out, they could both come back here and work it out and make each other miserable or happy according to the wealth and strength of their own characters. The good person coming back has a good life. The poor person who had a bad life comes back with a bad life. But all things are paid out in terms of law, order, and integrity. Now, as soon as we become aware of integrity as a fact in life, we can begin to search for it in the literature of the past. And it might be well to remember that a search thus carefully conducted might be more profitable to all concerned than a lifetime dedicated to TV. Because in TV, there are very few truths. In TV, all circumstances are tempered for profit. They are made to fasten the mind of the viewer upon the product that the sponsor is selling. This is also the general practice in life. The TV is merely a very advanced example. We are all surrounded constantly by the inducements to compromise ourselves for the benefit of the advertiser. Well, we may need his product, but we also must not forget that there is a whole world beyond the advertiser. The great banks, the great stock brokerages, all the great tyrants of industry and economy, all end when the individual lies down in the grave. When the grave closes over him, all these things belong to someone else. And yet, what does he take with him? What can he take with him if he has never had anything on his mind but profit? If he has always been a competitor from the cradle to the grave and he is suddenly in a place where there is no competition, what does he do? He has no right or no thought for his own future. In the days of my esteemed grandmother, the Wellesley was quite an important college. And in it, the young ladies of distinction were given training. Among the trainings which they received were languages. they were taught basic French and possibly a touch of basic German. They were supposed to have mastered basic English before they even got there. And then on the side they could go into specialist languages to include Italian or whatever they wanted to. But they always took a language when they went to travel. When they decided that they were going to do the great tour that was the final symptom or symbol of social elegance. When we depart from this world, we can hardly speak English and have no thought for any other language. We don't believe in languages. Well, we probably don't need them in the afterworld, but we also need other things. We should go out of this life prepared for something more than darkness. We should go prepared for something by means of which we can become citizens of a larger world. We should take with us an insight into the meaning of ourselves. We should be able to look back upon the life we have lived as a significant and important source for wisdom, truth, and love. We should go better people than we came. And if we make all of these things and bury it all in cocaine or something of that kind, we create a world that reminds us a little of the lost Atlantis or something of that kind. We find a world in which there is nothing worth saving. And unless the individual improves himself, goes after the realities of life with greater integrity, what can he take with him that he didn't bring? He will just go back to where he came from, further disillusioned. Disillusioned means to have an illusion taken away. It doesn't mean truth being taken away. It is a disillusioned person is the person who discovers that his illusions are not true. And the most common of all illusions is the great success illusion. A success pattern that has no foundation in any form of integrities. It is really high time that in this country and in all parts of the world, education should be at least modified to the point that the individual can leave this world a little better than he found it. He needs to be able to live a better life. And he should enjoy the living of it while he's still here. He is here to grow. And unless he continues to grow from childhood on, he is missing the reason for his existence. And that is one of the problems we have. I've talked to many people on this matter. Very few people have any idea of anything except here and now in the rent bill. They want the success. Life depends upon promotions and advantages, a wealthy marriage, a more or less compatible family, and retirement on a successful pension. This is life. The heavens did not ordain this. The universe did not produce man in order that he could live on a retirement income. He may need the retirement income, but he should get it because he is able to make useful contributions to his society. He should be a person who has a vision beyond retirement. He should have ideals. He needs religious principles. He needs philosophy. He needs ethics. And these are carefully ignored. And as a result, we have wars all over the place. So I think in the case of memory, that all these things should be remembered, not forgotten. We should really remember the opportunities we did not make good use of. We should consider and remember the privileges that we abused. We should also remember carefully the penalties of selfishness, that where we spent no thought for anyone but ourselves, and then in the long run found ourselves lonely and forgotten, that we were justly rewarded for our own conduct. We are expecting blessings, but we are not bestowing them. We expect to be treated very kindly, but kindness is not distinguished in society today. Now we're trying to break through some of this with new attitudes towards life. particularly hopes concerning the next century that is coming very close to us. We believe that we must have a better world. So now we can go back into the memory box and see if we can find out how to have this better world. To remember the values that have always protected those who used them. In this troubled sphere of ours, there has always been a minority that tried to do it right. There have always been good people. There have always been unselfish people. And there have always been martyrs who have been remembered in history, but whose lives have been conveniently forgotten in practice. So by going back to see what is there, we can find out what wasn't there and what still isn't here. We can see the opportunities to make the corrections that eluded the ages. But we are not preparing for that. Our young people are not being taught to build for a better world. They are being taught to become skillful in the things that everybody else knows. We are not doing it right. And someone says, well, the textbook hasn't been written. Oh, yes, it has. The history is the textbook. History has inspired philosophy, sanctified religion, advanced the arts and sciences, and given us the great economic reforms that are necessary to our survival. The democracy of Lycurgus in Sparta was a very good example of a system that worked. He said very simply that when you're born into a state, that you must accept with your birth a certain responsibility to protect your community, your world, and your system. If you are a person worthwhile, you have the courage to be honest. You have the understanding and insight to be thoughtful. You have the physical and moral impulses to live a decent life. And most of all, you realize that when you disgrace yourself, you disgrace your country and you disgrace your world. And while Lycurgus' system worked in Sparta, it held. And it made the Spartan take the attitude that it was a privilege to protect that which was necessary for the common good. Any exploitation was bitterly punished. And it was also in a way in Athens. For while the Athenians were more luxury living and did not have the same depth of purpose for the general meaning, in Athens there were certain rules. If you were a citizen of Athens, there were things you couldn't do. And if you insisted on doing them anyway, you were properly reprimanded. You could be punished by imprisonment, you could be exiled from the state, or you could be executed. There was to be no possible way of deteriorating the state without punishment. If you built a building that was poorly constructed and fell apart, you either had to rebuild the building or stand a very heavy penalty. There was no way in which you could buy your way out of a responsibility. There was no way in which you could trick someone else into giving you privileges that you did not deserve. Actually, on various occasions, Pythagoras, going through the towns, is said to have struck the keynotes of temples and buildings. If these keynotes were right, the building stood. If they were wrong, and he had continued sufficiently with a loot, he could have destroyed the building. In other words, there are laws, architecturally, artistically, culturally, musically, which, if fulfilled, make a beautiful world. Give everyone an opportunity to be the best that they can be, and give to even the simplest person a place in destiny. This is all part of the plan of things. Today we look back 200 or 400 years to the founding of our own country. The history of our country is in the memory of our history and in our documents and in the various passages of our constitutions. These things are known.
We know what we need, we know what we should have, but no one really seems to care. Everyone is centered only upon what is best for him at this moment, and he is going to fall almost certainly for that which has the greatest economic pressure. So we are not learning. Now, a lot of people are learning. Many are thinking. But when the moment comes, the old prejudices will sink in, and the individual will fail to make the changes that could actually put him into a proper situation. Memory is short when it comes to public office. It is as short as the promises that are made and broken before the ink is dry. But memory also can tell us who were the good ones, what they did, what their concepts were, and why we should test the life we live. Every art, science, and policy should be tested. Nothing should be accepted that is not provable or demonstrable in some way. We can check and test every law that we pass. We can do and check every statement that is made to find out what is essentially true and right. And memory has given us this privilege. Memory is a sort of muse, a mystical deity, which gives us the power to know what no book itself can teach us, but which books are written about. We have a great libraries in the world of books telling of the thoughts, wisdom, ideals, and dreams of other people, of other nations, of other races. For the most part, however, the average individual simply says, well, why read them? We're already far advanced beyond their condition. Why should we read about the Greeks 25 centuries later? They're gone. Well, the thing we don't realize is that this term gone is gradually applying also to us. And if we do not catch up on some of this reading, we will not know why we are not succeeding. So all this business of neglecting the past because it's past must be changed, because we are building a past which will also have to be forgotten unless we change it. And to change it means to get to work on it and to do the things that will help to do it. Good reading is very helpful to memory, but at the present time good reading is not particularly popular. It's like the motion picture and television productions. It is simply sensationalism to bring in money. A book is a success not because it tells us something, but because it sells 1 million copies. And the more unimportant the book, the larger the sale. Why? Because the average person is not trained to recognize value. We do not know the difference. It never occurs to the average person that his reading should teach him something. He thinks of it only as a way of amusing himself. When the television programs are so bad he can't stand them, he can pick up a modern novel and go through that. We do not have any sense that the hours that we have in this world are valuable, that there are times in which we should do things that are important. And if we want to know what's important, we must look inside of ourselves and in the great pattern of world motion. We must see how we can fit into progress, how through us someone, if it's only a very close friend, will be a little better, a little wiser, a little more useful to themselves and to those around them. We've got to have more and more interest in life as growth and not in life as joy. Yet growth can be the greatest joy in the world. The individual who is doing something worthwhile has a standard of values that the indolent individual will never understand. There is definitely a tremendous sense of purpose, and when this picks up an individual, that individual has a richer life than they could otherwise ever hope for. So that it's not a case of giving up the fun and taking nothing but responsibility. It's rather the recognition that sometimes the greatest fun is in the responsibility, then when we're doing what we should be doing, there is a sense of internal security and sufficiency. When we're doing what we know we shouldn't do simply because we're trying to have fun, then there is great trouble. We do see this realized every day in the narcotics problem. We see the individual who wants to be 12 feet tall, and as a result of that killed himself off in his 30s and 40s. He not only wants to be 10 and 12 feet tall, but he is perfectly willing to pay so much money for the privilege of being that tall that he has to commit burglary and murder to get the funds. And now we find this handling of drugs being lowered into the grammar schools, where the students are selling narcotics to get their own. This is something that is simply unbelievable. It is something that shows complete indifference to all sense of values. It is a gradual closing in of mediocrity upon everyone. The process of gradually becoming less and less in order to feed an ego which is dying of starvation because it is doing nothing significant. If we want to be free from this sense of being midgets, then instead of trying to be great drug addicts, why not become great human beings by doing things that are rewarded by recognition or by achievement which brings comfort and consolation to the inner life? We are in the face now of the realization that memory is a factor in the development of the soul. It is a soul power. It is there in order that we can transmute the useless into something sublime, that we can transform the center of life from this constant nagging pressure to have rather than to become. We can escape all of these forces by developing a tremendous sense of internal integrities. We must do this. It is necessary. It is part of the life that was given to us when we came here. So that we need now to recognize how to be 12 feet tall and sober. How we can become involved in those useful and meaningful purposes by which we can change the course of history. That we can pick a world out of the doldrums and put it back on its feet. It is perfectly proper and not right and natural that we should have a better century ahead. We should learn something, but it only means that we're going to have bigger computers. If it means that Wall Street is going to have more authority, if it means that we're going to have internal and international political strife all through the 21st century, it's very possible that the gods on high Olympus will figure something a little more strenuous to take care of the situation. We don't want that. We want to be independent, and that means that we must be free from our own mistakes. As long as we're in slavery to them, we cannot be truly free. So if we want a world that is worth living in, a world that fulfills the purpose for itself, each individual must become a little more studious, a little more thoughtful, a little more aware of true values, and find that he doesn't want to forget it as far as his memory is concerned. He wants to teach it. He wants to understand it. He wants to use the memory to advance the total growth of himself. He needs the memory to point out his past mistakes, to rejoice over his past virtues, and to use the combination of mistake and virtue to move the whole pattern of character a step forward towards the fulfillment of its original purpose. Memory is very important as a part of the compound of the human being. As far as we know, he is the most advanced creature with memory that we have on earth. There are indications of primitive memory amongst many animals and birds, but there are no proofs of the continuity of memory that we have with the human being. Not only has he the memory, but he has the auditory system to tell what he learns and what he knows. He is able to plan something about the future. The tree has to stand till it falls. Man can move, can do things, can make changes that are vital and important. But in order to do that, he must recognize what is important. And it is not important that he be indolent. It is not important that he settles back and just enjoys himself. Because if enough people do that, the world will fall. It is far better that the individual should wear out than simply rot away. And it is far better that each day we should try to do something a little more important to those we love, for those we think of, for the world we belong to, and for the nation we want to respect. These things are part of a good memory. We remember what we have done, we remember how we can correct it, we can remember what we learned and forgotten, we can restore various types of knowledge, and through study and reading we can enrich memory so that it will continue to serve us throughout life, and for all we know, afterwards. After all, if we have no memory afterwards, then there was no need for a memory here. Nature has endowed us with memory. It has given us these values in order to use them. And the fact that we have a memory here indicates clearly that it is part of our immortal nature. It goes with us beyond the material world. If it all ended in matter, the sooner we forget it, the better. But if we have to live with it, and we will if we are immortal creatures, then a memory is very important, because we have to live with what we've done, what we've thought, what we've known. We have to live with the degree of humanity that we have achieved. We must face our loves, we must face our hates. We must recognize our compliments and our accusations. We must realize and know all that we have been in order to have the directives to become all that we can be. And for these purposes, memory is extremely important and must be cultivated in every way possible. We need it, but we need to use it, not abuse it. We do not need to use it in order to know how many people are on a baseball team. We do not need to use it as statistics in the rise and fall of stock. If we do use it for that and had common sense, we would be out of the market. But we're still in it. But we do need memory to use it to grow, to use it to become better people day by day, to better understand the reason of life. And suddenly, for perhaps the first time in human history, it is possible for the veil to be lifted and we can see what life is, what its real purpose is, why we live, why we were created in the first place, and what is going to happen in the end. That we are not merely little fragments floating up for a few years on the surface of the ocean of life. We are living things, growing things. We are creatures with a past and a future. And it is our memory of the past that will help us to build the future. These things we have to think about and continue to grow with to the very best of our abilities. So I think that Lord Bacon probably was more or less correct when he pointed out that memory was the open gate to a world knowledge. Memory was the ability to profit by the experience of everything that has gone before. Memory is the great kind of schoolroom. In it are the classes in which every bit of available knowledge taught. Memory changes the world into one great university in which each person who comes into this world has a chance to graduate with honors. And it is best for each person to try to do this as best he can. And it's certainly better than wandering around through the years blaming the politicians, blaming this or that, or creating antagonisms and anarchy. It is much better to recognize the importance of growing, to save our energy for great constructive thoughts. If we cannot help others, then we can perhaps help ourselves. If the others do not wish to listen, we can quietly listen to the voices of memory. And by gradually growing, even in through our own early life, if we take the first 25 years of the present life and think back on it, we're going to learn something. Everything that is measured by thoughtfulness helps to enrich memory, and in so doing helps us to be better people. So the mystery of memory is, I think, very, very vital to us. It is one of the great keys to the survival of mankind. It is not something that was simply an accident that we have to suffer for our own past. It is part of the balance of nature. It is the one power in nature by which we learn that we cannot make a mistake without ultimately growing as the result of the mistake. And we cannot do it right without ultimately being relieved of some pain or pressure that was delaying or hurting us. If we live right physically, we will live right morally, mentally, emotionally. Every case we have rules to follow. If we live according to rules, we will live. And memory is the records of those rules, as written down in stone, on tablets, in clay, or on the strata of rocks. It is something that reminds us forever that we live in a lawful universe. This is a purposed creation, and either we have to be purposed human beings or we will suffer. We are not going to be allowed to ruin the world and then go scot-free after having done it. Nor are we allowed to say that the world can ruin us. We have a right to think. We have a right to learn. And the memory gives us the skill to explore the mysteries of truth, the mysteries of knowledge, and to build a solid foundation upon our visions and our hopes. It is through memory, largely, that we know the mystery of love. And when we think of those we have loved, it becomes part of the immortality of all good. All memories that are constructive can be lived with. Those that are destructive must be transmuted, or they will destroy the person. So we are here to grow in beauty and in truth. We are here to perfect faculties and powers and not abuse them. And memory is one of those beautiful and kindly things which we can disturb and discredit, but which is always there to make a better life for us and give us a better hope for the future. And as we look back upon the past and see what we've come through, let us also look forward into the future, knowing that we are capable of building a future according to our heart's desire. We do not have to live in any kind of a world that we haven't built. We do not face any problems that we haven't caused. And when we solve the problem, we have the reward. And the reward is what we're all seeking: peace and human brotherhood and the reconciliations of all of the disputes and sorrows and problems that have burdened mankind. Well, that's it.